So we're going to dive into storytelling MG style with Shawn Kruggel, our Executive Creative Director, and Lizzy Bakhaus, our VP of Strategy. Shawn's been an important part of MG's creative efforts for over a decade. Before that, he spent several years in Chicago at Leo Burnett and Kramer Krasselt, just to name a couple. He's the driving force behind our creative efforts, and he's also got a very unique background for a creative leader. Lizzy joined us just over a year ago and has been just an amazing leader for our strategy team. While her roots are in research and brand strategy, she also has experience across the spectrum, having most recently led Dish Network's internal advertising team, focusing on the blend of strategy, creativity, and performance. She's a critical thinker, a magic maker, and another driving force behind how we do what we do. How'd I do on that?
Yes,
you guys
great.
like that?
Thanks
Working
for
toward that?
that.
Want to can that?
Can I take you everywhere with me?
Yeah.
It's better than I wrote.
Take that home to your significant other and say, here's what I do. Here's what I do.
They have no idea.
No. My mother, God bless her, still doesn't know what I do. Anyway, thank you guys so much for joining us.
Thanks for having us.
To give our listeners and viewers a little bit of glimpse into how we do this. So first, we always ask our guests to share a little bit of their story on how they got here. So Lizzy, I will start with you. Tell us your story.
Perfect. Well, I actually started in sports advertising, so action sports. I was actually responsible for setting up sponsorships for key athletes or interesting people in different markets, and it got me really excited about the idea of brand in general. So I actually started in digital advertising sales, moved into brand partnerships, and then actually became a brand strategist at a shop in Denver called Brand Juice. I was there for 5 years and moved up the ranks until I actually started working at an agency that was much more focused in consumer packaged goods. So everything from packaging and how things sit on the shelf and all of the things that
Tell stories, don't they?
Oh, they sure do. They sure do. And they have to tell the stories fast. So get that shelf stopping power was something we always worked on and focused on. And then, of course, went to Dish, like you said, and spent several years there. It was amazing being on the client side to see just the vast network of marketers that are really structured to bring a single brand or portfolio of brands stories to life. It's amazing, the magnitude when you're in-house. And then, obviously, I've been here. So it's been a real blast.
Awesome. So give us your story.
Okay, so I'll tell you a funny story. When I was in college, I went to the University of Kansas, and I was in the journalism school, and the building was all aflutter because the different companies would come in and talk to students about opportunities. And one of the ones that came in was Leo Burnett, and I could not have cared less. I was so quick to go to the punk rock bar that night, and people were very jazzed about this. Well, long story short, quickly I ended up in Chicago, and I didn't have a job. I kind of moved up there after college,
Because it sounded like a good idea.
Right, I'll figure this out. But I mean, at least I'll be in a city that's cool. The job part can come second. My first job there, which is kind of unrelated, but I worked for a magazine called Punk Planet, and I figured out not long after that I need a job that pays the bills. So how could I parlay this kind of
Nothing against Punk Planet.
Nothing against Punk Planet. It was a pretty well known magazine at the time, but. I ended up getting a job as the assistant to the strategy department at Kramer Krasselt, which was and still is maybe one of the only independent-owned ad agencies there is, and maybe the only one
in Chicago.
In Chicago,
Yeah.
And I was basically the learning brand strategy.
Could be High Dive as well. Now that I think about it, but yeah.
But yeah, at the time, and so I was working at Corona, I was working on Heinz, I was working on Smart Ones. But what I loved about it is that I'd get shipped out to do these ethnographies with moms in their homes, like getting their kids ready for breakfast to figure out how they use orange juice or things like that. So I really loved that aspect of it. But I was, basically, like Lizzy said, in kind of her career, moved my way up the ranks in the brand strategy department. Ended up going to work at Leo Burnett after that, and then after some time moved back home to work at a small shop that then got acquired by the agency that you now run.
Wow. So talk about your journey from strategy to creative.
So the interesting thing is the people, I was a strategist for many years, but I always gravitated to the kind of creative storytelling that brands have to do to not, first of all, inspire the creative team, and then the creative team then inspires the people that they want to buy or sell, whatever the particular brand is. So I always gravitated to that side when I started to see that there were quant strategists and consumer-focused strategists, consumer psychology-focused strategists. There were kind of the creative strategists that kind of worked a little bit more closely with the creative team, and I gravitated to those creative kind of members and wrote briefs accordingly, and kind of eventually started to write concepts alongside the strategies, which creative teams of course hate.
Right.
And finally, that person might have been you, said, I think you've had enough of that. Maybe you should just do what heaven is calling you to do.
It's
Yeah.
crazy because I had kind of the opposite. I started in design and moved into brand strategy.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, basically with you, I just wanted you to stop grading your own homework. I mean, that's
This strategy is
kind of
great,
how
I'll tell
that,
you why.
like, the strategy is
Because I
great.
came up with this
Yeah,
awesome
I had a
idea.
creative idea, so let me back into this.
Yeah. So now I'm getting criticized a lot more, which is great.
Yeah.
by me.
Yes. Yeah. You're just being kept honest. No, that's awesome. So obviously, as an agency, we've really made a big bet on storytelling for many reasons. Whether it's our heritage as a part of the Dallas News Corporation or something that we see out in the world that there is a dearth of in terms of good stories, connected stories. So you guys were working with me side by side as we really dove into storytelling and the components of it. And I think a lot of agencies are going to tell you, and for our listeners, this is a totally self-promoting episode. So just beware ahead of time. This is, I think every agency would tell you that they tell stories on behalf of their clients, but there's unique components to what we believe makes a good story. So talk about some of that foundational work that we started doing, Lizzy.
Yeah, of course. I think that fundamentally, marketing is about building and strengthening relationships with your customers. And when you think about relationships, you know that they take hard work. So in order for a relationship to be worth putting in the effort for, there has to be something for you. And I think one of the foundational mistakes that many brands make is they're telling their story either as a we were first, or we were founded when, or we've got this many employees, or we have this shiny, spectacular product, rather than creating an avenue by which people can see where they fit into that brand's world, right? So I think that that's a big thing that we try to do.
Or where
in
that brand
everything.
fits in their world.
Sure, where that brand fits in their world, either or, seeing what the relationship is, not just a story that's being touted. I think that that is something that we try to focus on at Medium Giant. I think storytelling in general is a pretty obvious how in marketing. It's how most marketers market, but I think Medium Giant does it differently by thinking really about how we can create meaning in customers' lives, be it our customers or our customers' customers.
Very nice. So talk about how that manifests itself in terms of a construct, because the more as we scale, or as we've scaled as an agency, it's nice when there's some level of a construct and a formula that you can use for what makes a great story. Obviously, it's going to show up in different ways. It's going to manifest itself differently through a digital experience versus something more experiential versus just something that's happening on TV. So talk about the construct that we sort of created to really frame how a story should work.
I think it's interesting that we're not the first, and we will not be the last ad agency, creative agency to talk about storytelling.
Sure.
But a lot of times they impose their model on the storytelling model. Here's what we do in advertising, and isn't see how that's like that in stories, where I think that one thing, I guess a little bit humble, that we try to do is say, well, how do great stories get built? And then we should follow that model. Stories being much older than ad agencies. So I think that's when Lizzy and I really started to get like this idea of critical context. What are all the things you got to set up about a story to make it work? What is the inciting incident? And these are storytelling words from the literary world, not the brand or advertising or design world. So you think about a critical context. What is it that happens that really incites the action in that story? And normally that thing is conflict. And most of the time what advertising tries to do, at least what we're trying to do, is either bring to life a conflict that people knew was there but don't recognize, or create one that they didn't know would be so compelling to them. And I'll just kind of go back to, when Lizzy was talking about these two, the consumer and the brands, like they both have a gap that they're trying to fill. And then there's the brands that are trying to fill an experience or develop an experience gap, and there's consumers that have that experience. And both of those are stories that we hope fit together. Like Rocky, I like when Rocky tells Adrian that the reason that they get along is because they both have gaps. I got gaps, you got gaps, and together we fill gaps. And you can pretty much learn everything from Rocky that I'm gonna.
I did not have Rocky on my bingo card today, so thank you for
But
that.
I want to touch on where that story ends, at least in the construct that Medium Giant or that Shawn and I have worked on building up together. We start with that critical context, like he said, only the things that matter, because it is easy for a story to grow boring or
Sure.
weary or
Or
tiresome.
undifferentiated.
Yeah, uninteresting, right? So what is the most critical context you can provide? Getting to that inciting incident, that moment of truth, that tension point, and then ultimately achieving what we call an earned ending. So it's not just an ending, it's something that has been earned or gained or changed or pivoted or something that really provides the customer with a true benefit. So we love this framework of thinking about it in this set of three. So I just wanted to make sure that
And the interesting thing about that is if you kind of plotted that out on a graph, that kind of critical contents, inciting incident, denouement, whatever, even a certain context, and then kind of earn ending as you get the result or the value, it follows the same curve or arc as a story would.
Yeah.
And I think we
And I think from a human,
got lucky on that.
yeah, well, and from a psychology perspective, though, like I know our brains are attuned to a good story following that same construct. So there's a psychology to it as well.
We got to that construct. I was walking down the street on the phone with you, and you were sitting in your garage when we figured that out. Funny enough, noticing about it.
Yeah. I think I was walking around the garage probably having a nice cold beer.
I was about to say critical context right there would be good.
How far you want to dig into that?
Oh my gosh. No, that's great. So talking about those inputs that create that critical context or create that inciting incident, I think sometimes people internally on the client side will look at their brand and look at their customers and maybe not recognize elements for what they are. In other words, sometimes clients have a pretty good beat on what their story is and they just want it to help shape it or maybe tighten it up. And a lot of times clients will say, well, our sales are pretty good. We think our customers like us because of this. And we see what they're doing in the marketplace and it's not really following any consistent story arc. So how do you guys work with clients and how do we think about sitting down with clients and really helping them to unearth what those gems are?
Oh, it's a great question. I bet he would say the same thing or roughly something similar. I think it comes back to purpose. I think it's about the business's true purpose. I think I was recently listening to a podcast on the idea of telling true stories. And it was really interesting because it was talking about how the best stories are authentic and simple. And we overcomplicate stories or we make them seem feigned in some veil of mistruth to seem more marketing speak. But the best stories are built on purpose and are authentic and simplistic. And I know that sounds easy to say, but I think the most important part about being a purpose-driven or rooted in truth organization is it feels real. It looks real. Once you figure out what is the thing that we are really delivering for our customers, what are we actually doing? What are we really providing to the world? What universal problem are we solving? Then a true story is the best story there is. I mean,
well, and are we doing it in a way that is authentic to them?
Right.
In other words, I think there's a lot of ways to solve. It could be a trust problem. It could be a value perception problem. But a lot of times, I think we find clients try to manufacture something about themselves to answer that, and there's no depth to it. So maybe it becomes a campaign. Maybe there's some level of sustainability about that, but there's no lifespan. It's a thing, and then it stops because there's nothing underlying that's really driving that, promoting that. That you can hang it all around. I think sometimes having those conversations with clients is like, you talk about hard truths. That's a hard conversation to have, to say, listen, maybe it solves this in the short term, but in the long term, we need to dig deeper and really, to your point, go back to your purpose. What did you guys get in this game for? What makes you different than somebody else authentically?
Yeah, I think it just goes back to, speaking of stories that people find relatable. That's what the hero's journey or any of that is what is the story that I find relatable? This is relatively on topic, but if you can feel it guttural that I've had something like that happen, or you can tell me a story where I can almost take the journey with you. When I was in third grade, you guys probably had this. It was my birthday, and it was my day to bring in the treats. You guys have this when you were kids? And so
I don't think let you do that anymore, but yeah.
okay, in the 80s, they did it. And Sherry Kruggel made me. What do you want? I want Rice Krispie treats. That's the big winner.
Yeah.
And I'm in Mrs. Anderson's third grade class in Michigan, and I'm handing these treats out. And I'm going up and down the rows, and I can clearly tell halfway through there ain't going to be enough treats. And I'm looking at Mrs. Anderson, and Mrs. Anderson is looking at me, and I'm sweating bullets. Because this is your moment to shine in third grade.
Oh, yeah.
And so she kind of quietly whispers, break them in half. If you break them in half. So now I'm breaking them in half. And they still aren't going to and I'm mortified. And I'm telling you this story to this day because any kid that's third grade, you can identify, like, can you imagine? Like the lights are getting hotter, the ceiling's getting shorter, or,
Yes.
you're closed in. I'm screwed on my big day. But if you can relate to that kind of guttural feeling that everybody has that human truth, as Lizzy said, I go back to that like IKEA spot with the lamp in the rain.
Yep.
It makes no sense. It has no feelings. But everybody is like, you know what? I have saved a piece of string that almost fell off the edge of a table. I have felt sorry for an inanimate object. I mean, those are the types of stories and things that are universal. Lizzy also used that word. So I think that's what we try to do. We try to find a brand challenge and relate it to something human.
Love it. So looking beyond our clients and looking around the industry as we like to do, and like we like to share great examples, who else is out there that you think, wow, this brand really understands the concept of what makes a great story? What do you see?
The one that comes to mind really quickly for me, and I'll just say what it is, and then I'll let you know, is is Heineken's, the pub museums. I mean, I saw a lot of killer work this year, and I'm probably going to mention a lot of the same work a lot of other people would. That's why it's great. But that one worked on so many levels for me, because it isn't just about the pub. It isn't just about the camaraderie there. It isn't just about the history. I mean, man, did they layer that in and have an idea in such a human, global, save something for, posterity, for humanity, that's got patina and richness to it, that wasn't just about selling Heineken.
Right.
And man, did that make that, speaking of purpose, they built on theirs, in a way that was a true human, in UNESCO, global need. So I don't know if that answered your question, but that's an example of I think a story that took on an even higher purpose.
I love it. I heard someone say the other day, I hate that I can't remember who it was. I was listening to a different podcast. They mentioned that all companies are media companies. And once a company realizes that every company is a media company and they start acting and thinking that way, then they have a much better handle on storytelling. And so when I think of a brand that first understood that and has continued to sustain that incredible storytelling connection, for me, it's Red Bull. Building a media house and structuring their storytelling method to not be telling you, why we give you wings. Well, they don't say that anymore because they got in big trouble for saying they give you wings. But they found a way to actually interact with customers in real life, in their true, native, enthused environments where people are feeling the highs of action sports and feeling the true, authentic joy that comes from their passions, or the passions of the riders or snowboarders that they love, being right there in that space with them, and taking and owning that moment. So to me, they kind of changed the way that storytelling went from we are telling a story to you to we are just here to help your story be told. So I love Red Bull for that.
I think it was Lee Clow, former TBWA CEO great, who said everything is media.
Yes. Thank you so much.
Basically, it's like, whatever gets in the way between you as a consumer and the product you want to buy that's trying to get you to buy that, it's media. It could be packaging, it could be the store, it could be an experience.
Kind of reminds me of the kind of acts, not ads. Yeah, I thought that was a humankind kind of deal where it's like, and I think ultimately that was it was kind of interesting at the time, but now I think that is pervasive across all of everything that we do. I mean, if you aren't building some type of total consumer experience, then you're just making advertising, and it's not effective.
I will add to what you're saying. I think there's something really noteworthy around, we have this structure for storytelling, right? And we can tell people, go tell a true, honest story. But I think what makes the magic happen in an advertisement is telling a true story, or telling a story that's impactful to a customer, but doing it with intrigue. And I think that's where you meet people like Shawn, or you meet other creatives or strategists or people that are just innately talented, or they have this spark. So I won't say it's easy. This whole storytelling idea, we can talk about frameworks and structure. The idea of being able to create intrigue, that to me is the magic that comes after the brief, right? Finding that creative solution. And I can think of many campaigns or identity projects we've worked on where we've built a true story, but the veil or the cloak on it was so intriguing that it made it more meaningful or more resonant to a customer. So I don't want to make it sound like it's easy. It's not.
Yeah, and I think that it's interesting, like for me, having kind of come from the strategy world, not necessarily the creative track or ad school or this or that. Like I look at advertising shockingly less than people ask me about. Like my wife or friends or people and everything is like, what do you think about this ad? Or what do you think about the Super Bowl ads? And I pay attention to it, but like I would rather watch or listen to like The Moth, like than I would like pay attention to like the top ads of the week. And I'm on the drum and all the same stuff you guys are on, but those are rarely where sources of inspiration come from, at least for the team, at least for me.
Very cool. So let's juxtapose this arc of storytelling and the need for deep creative thinking with what we see from not just our clients, but really the industry. And that is a push for how do we scale? How do we automate? How do we use technology on our behalf? And how do we find that balance between an algorithm writing a story because of data points that we insert, or an algorithm telling us where and when to go buy for efficiency's sake, which has a very meaningful, important application. But how do we not lose our sense of story with all of these different avenues that in many ways we turn over to non-human entities to help us generate and proliferate?
Great question. I actually have been thinking a lot about this. Wait, you have something? Go
I
ahead.
was laughing because I'm like, you know what? I know he's gonna ask us about AI, and I'm such like a tactile. Like I'm the kind of person that keeps the books after I read them. I'm like so like Luddite that way. But I knew you were gonna ask me, so I do have it. I thought about it for a second. Was thinking, like right now from a creative team standpoint, we use AI as a helper, an ancillary kind of helper tool. But I think we're moving into the phase where now it's going to be more of a development tool. And then eventually we'll get to the point where, we're pitting AI platforms against each other, for like, we're more like puppet masters of different AI platforms. And now let's set up the right constructs to have these 5 compete against these 5 for ideas. And then we'll take, so I think there'll be more of I think people are nervous that there'll be less of a part to play because they'll be doing everything. And I'm wondering if we use the platforms against each other like chess pieces. I mean, but right now I think we're still kind of in that early stage of how do we use it? Where's fair to use it? Where do I not want to use it? Because there is a little bit of egoism in the creative. I want to own it. I want the team to own it. I want the idea to be original. I'm the last person that wants someone to find out that part of it came from here, but I think we're using it as like an add-on, a bolt-on. What if I type in this word and it'll give me 2 adjectives that make me feel something else rather than I want to use it for an idea itself. So I don't know. I think that's kind of the stages we're in. Right, or at least sounds like the stages we're moving in with something like that.
What do you think, Lizzy?
Yeah, I'll maybe answer more of the first part of the question, which is around like with so many tools at our disposal, how do we choose what to use? I feel like I got to a point a couple years ago where people ask me for marketing advice all the time. And they ask me like, all right, if you could just tell me one thing, what is the secret of advertising? And so I recently feel like I've gotten to a pretty pithy response on that I can explain pretty well what storytelling is, but marketing too. And I think it boils down to two things. I think it boils down to reach and resonance. And if you can find a way to look at all the tools at your disposal, whether you're a startup, whether you're a high functioning marketing team, and you can look at the tools that you use for reach and you look at the tools that you use for resonance and figure out where your shortcomings are. Resonance, in my opinion, is ensuring that the message that we're putting out to this audience or this consumer resonates with them, matters to them. That's definitely in the Lizzy Shawn department, right? And there's other folks on my team, on the strategy team, and our media team that are much closer to this concept of tactical reach.
Right.
And so I think if you have this amazing story, and let's just go back to the Rice Krispies. Let's say that story, that just resonates, right? It resonates, right? That story is a good story, but it's not reaching the right person, then things are imbalanced, and it doesn't matter if it's a resonant story because it doesn't reach the right target. And the same goes both ways. So I'd say if I was to look at my tech stack or the tools that I have at my disposal or the ones that I want to take off the budget or I want to add to the budget, I would look at, am I reaching the right target and am I resonating with the right target? And of course, you need to make sure that you know who your target is first, which is a different story, different topic.
When you say resonance, I like that because it makes me feel like from a creative standpoint, we're just trying to make people feel it first and own it second.
Yeah.
I mean, I feel like that's the creative that does really well. Is like if they can feel it in their bones and then there's a part of it or all of it or that then subsequently they can own, then that wins. This is not really an advertising thing. So, but I love like Charlie XCX. This here, like her album Brat, like yes, it was an album, but it became like a language. It became like a feeling. It became like adopted fast.
Yeah.
And I just feel like that was something that people could feel, and then they could ultimately adopt it. Yeah. So I love stuff. I know that's not necessarily traditional. What we're talking about with traditional advertising, but in my mind, it is.
People do feel it, then they adopt. I mean, whether it's lexicon,
Yeah.
like what some of the old classic Budweiser stuff used to do. I mean, there's a lot of that if you're doing it right. You resonate to the point to where it gets adopted.
Yeah.
Sure.
So I loved that whole everything around that album and the way that her kind of following took that.
So, all right. Speaking of topical things, I'm gonna ask the same question two different ways. What stories do we have in overabundance? If you look around our industry and around marketing, like what are you just like, oh my God, not another one of this? What are we seeing?
I would probably say non-differentiated stories that are just taking up space and filling air. And I'm not talking about performance marketing tools that are telling you about a very cost-associated opportunity to book with this airline today. I'm talking about brands that are just speaking in vague marketing jargon, but not saying truly the place that they have in brands' lives. So I think those are stories that are maybe they're not stories. They're just it's advertising that's in abundance.
Data points that are sort of organized into a construct of some kind.
Yes, and it's not real storytelling to me.
So going back to the previous question, it makes you wonder sometimes. Some of the message you're seeing is like, where's that? Is that almost algorithmically generated?
Yeah, was this ad meant for me?
Because or maybe it is meant for you, but it's just not organized into a story, right? It's just a bunch of set of freaking data points that don't really make sense or aren't compelling in and of themselves.
Right.
But could be organized into something more meaningful, but just weren't.
Right. Even if you just simplify it down to the funnel, I think that those are the things. I notice standout ads that are exceptional and intriguing and meaningful. And I notice ads that seem like they showed up at my life at the wrong time. I notice when there's imperfections in the way a brand who is as powerful as a United Airlines, for example, who has a massive marketing team with a very strong performance marketing budget. And I see things and I know where I fit in their funnel, and I'm not getting the ad that feels like it's going to convince me to actually take action at the right time. And so I think my expectations are so high, and probably because of my current role, but also because of the way that all of our expectations have changed. Even when we get an advertisement on Instagram that we don't feel like really fits our mold, we're like, what is this? I mean, the bar is so high now, I think, for performance advertising and all of the different channels and avenues within which we're experiencing ads. We have such high expectations.
Right.
So
I think it's like, I guess it's like the most popular one is the one I think it's overused, is like the traditional kind of hero's journey, like Luke Skywalker. So there's these books. I don't know if you've read them. This will be a little nerdy, but they're called From Another Point of View. And they have one for A New Hope and Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi. And they're all stories based on characters that are minor bit parts in the movie. And the stories are real short. They're like short stories.
Okay.
So it's like, when R2-D2 gets picked for the first time.
Yep.
Well, another R2 unit blows. He's got a bad motivator. Uncle Owen, remember that?
Yep.
Well, it'll be a whole story about what happened to the robot that had the bad motivator. Now that's wicked because he's not the hero. He's not but he's no less a huge part of that movie for people that are loyalists to that genre, that thing. And it's like, but he's not focused on. He's left behind in the story. And they've got whole books of these things. And like my 16-year-old, and ever since he's been, I don't know, probably 10, like can't wait for the next one of these to come out, because they're like, that you have like a connection to that character, but you don't know anything about it. And I think so many brands' audiences have like the big audience, and clearly money tells you that's where to put money. But there's, I think a lot of these brands, are starting to have, there's still opportunity, I guess, or I should say, for what have historically been the role players or the background or the scenery to be the lead, the lead character. I'll give you an example. Like, we work with Ulster County, New York, and typically our audience is exactly who you would think. They're the outdoor enthusiasts from Manhattan that go to Ulster County to ski and hike and rail trail and this or that. And we had the opportunity to work on an accessibility project for them. So, from the onset, it was like, well, we have our audience, and then we're going to do this accessibility campaign. Well, what the feelings and thoughts, and same reason that people that have accessibility needs, why isn't that the lead story that could get people that don't necessarily have those exact needs? It's just kind of flipping the script a little bit, and telling the Ulster story from a different point of view. Much like the Star Wars thing. So I think there's a lot of opportunity clearly there for that. I don't know, finding interesting groups of people like the Liquid Death and Elf corpse paint thing. I mean, being kind of a metalhead, I love stuff like that. But
Liquid Death had unexpected partners.
Right. But right.
I never expected, but when you see it, you're like, oh my God, that's
even more.
Yeah. But that thing was like, here's two kind of untolds, and how do we, anyway.
I think it's interesting you bring up the Star Wars example, because you're talking about ways that Disney has decided in their new ownership of Star Wars to extend an already extremely extended story. And I think when we talk about storytelling, it doesn't have to be this one grand aha of a story. It can be a concept of a story that you can fulfill in so many different ways.
It's almost like an ecosystem, right?
Right, completely. And I think that Disney thinking, hey, well, Star Wars is never going to end, right? I mean, that's kind of the whole idea, what you just explained. I didn't know they were doing that. But that idea that we're going to keep creating these mini stories, these micro moments of connection with our customer base, it's genius. Like, the story never ends.
Yeah.
So I think Disney obviously nails that in general. So
And the ecosystem thing is, I think, right too. It's like, I don't know what it was, but like the first book, I don't know if it's like 100 Years of Solitude or whatever, when you open it up and the first thing they show you on the inside page is like the family tree, because the book is so intricate. Is that the right, if I'm getting that right, with so many characters that you're literally like, the first thing they want to show you is this ecosystem is massive, and you can imagine all the stories are going to offshoot with this. So they kind of want to show you that up front, so you don't get over, or you kind of have a general sense.
And there are brands out there, like I think Geico is a good example, that understands how to create ecosystem. And sometimes they're disparate parts. Like,
Yeah.
you know, Caveman has nothing to do with Gecko, but in other times they start to cross over, and like it's all in the same family. And you can see one commercial, or you can see 3 commercials, and understand the thread that's connecting it all together. I think the brands that understand how to build that ecosystem, and certainly Geico has a budget. Not every brand has that luxury of creating that kind of a budget. But how do you think about creating that space to both get recognition, but also have flexibility, whether it's new products, new markets, new messages? And I think that's really the magic of understanding how to create stories in today's world, which are multifaceted, multi-plane, multi-platform, can come to life in one of a million ways. And I think that's what's most exciting for us as we look at our current clients and where we're trying to go, is how do we really help them think that through on a multi-plane basis. I don't think everybody has that nailed down yet.
Yeah, it's a tough thing to nail. I think that tactics, or reasons to believe, whatever you want to call it, attract people, but stories motivate people. Yes. I think that
100%.
Those are the things that sometimes get confused in the process of storytelling, is figuring out what really needs to lead. And I think when you can build a story, it's so much more impactful, because it's actually going to motivate a change. And so I think that's, as you talk about that ecosystem and the framework, I think many brands who know who they are and they have a true story to tell, and they've taken time to position the brand and know exactly what they're all about, those are the ones that can more easily build the ecosystem that you're talking about. All these different ways to tell our story here or there, or in earned media or paid media.
That's where you would ask how is the industry evolving. I mean, the number of disciplines within our industry. I mean, I see. I don't even know what they are. But I mean, what that says to me is, even in certain capacities, that there is a need for different type of storytellers on a grand scale, on a microscopic scale. So, there used to be 5 years in the account management department, in the strategy department, the media department, your analytics. I mean, maybe there were 7. Now there's, right. So there's been a proliferation of disciplines to fulfill the need on the number of platforms and assets stories now can be and have to be told to reach those, multiple, bajillions of audiences you talked about earlier.
100%. So on that note, let's talk about what we see the next, let's just say 5 years, because 10 years is kind of crazy. Like, nobody knows what the F is going to happen in 10 years, but let's just talk about the next 5 years for us. Like, I think the rate of change is only accelerating. So how do you see storytelling evolving?
In the advertising landscape in general?
Or in general, but yeah.
I think that the whole industry is moving in a way that there's like a few things that are moving differently. The way that advertising or stories are delivered is different. The speed at which our clients we would love to have the speed at which they expect stories to be delivered, the amount of content that needs to be developed for those, and the channels that we put them are all proliferating all at the same time and happen. So it's like it's not like advertising. Or it used to be one campaign could kind of last you for the year. Here are the 5 channels that you have. So for us, I think it's more about how do we have build that universe that you said, and have multiple stories that come from the same purpose, that are built on truths that resonate with
that
people.
You can test, that you can iterate.
That's right. And that we're not, and even from a spend perspective, we're not going to put all our eggs in one basket per se, because it'll be gone tomorrow. There's not that same kind of longevity.
Very ephemeral. Right?
Yeah, for sure. So we've got to be thinking of ideas that are faster, of messages that are quicker, of emotional stories we can tell that aren't 100 years of solitude, that are faster, that are...
And don't take 6 months to create.
No, exactly. And I think so for increasingly in the next 5 years, that's what we will have to continue to get better at. Mm-hmm. And I think when you think of, just the amount of content being created by individuals, and we're competing with that. I think of this band Mandalay Bay. Have you heard of Mandalay Bay? It's like boyfriend, girlfriend, or sister, brother, and they create they are wildly successful, and maybe more so than their music, but they put this content out so quickly, and it's so compelling to watch, and you're not even sure every time what the real purpose for everything is, but it's kind of part of a grander narrative.
Right.
And I think all our brands are kind of looking for that, and hopefully the clients will be continually more forgiving in the sense that everything isn't a silver bullet. I just think that that's 5 years, like how we got to continue to think.
And so I think the things that I've started to gather, and I'm still kind of gathering all of the trends reports and hypotheses about what's to come, at least in the next year. And something that I've seen a lot of is this move by a large population of consumers towards being more empathetic and needing more emotional experiences with brands, which I think is really interesting. Moving to a much more empathetic space. I think we've seen Gen Z.
Which we need to be careful, because you can be, as a brand, really heavy-handed and just like, no, that's not.
And totally miss the mark.
Exactly.
Totally. So I think Gen Z is definitely pushing us in that space. I would say much more tactically, the power of influencers is growing at an insane rate. And I think in the next few years, it will be rare to purchase something without an influencer code attached to it. So for the most part, I think many people are finding brands or products through influencers. And if they're not, they've seen something from an influencer that has cookie tagged in their system or deep linked, and they're buying it on behalf of an influencer without even realizing it. So I think that's a big factor. I think social will continue to grow in a really crazy rate, and the way that we experience ads on social will continue to get smarter. I think ads, even just TV ads, CTV ads, are growing far more interactive. I've got options for which ads I'm watching now. I mean, I can just continue to see that expanding in such an amazing way. But I think most hopefully, I'm excited about advertising being acknowledged and honored in the way that business consultants are. I think it's continued to grow kind of as an industry more in that space of being kind of key consultants that many businesses go to consult with about major decisions for the headway of the business. And so I think that's great to see that hopefully salary and pay starts to lift in this category, in this industry too, because I think oftentimes, while maybe advertising isn't working as crazy of hours as I feel like we used to when I was younger, I feel like the industry is definitely getting more acknowledged and acclaimed in ways that Big Four consulting firms are.
Yeah. I think what's interesting about that point is, for all of the challenges and opportunities and headwinds and tailwinds that technology and automation give us, that if we play our cards right as an industry and as an agency, a lot of that stuff used to be more heavily associated with advertising and with agencies. Like, oh, they're so mired in production, they don't, I don't necessarily get the strategic thinking. Well, now that part is being commoditized and sort of devalued from an agency perspective, whether it's a client in-housing or whether it's just, that's just more of a commodity. I think the return to the table of where advertising agencies were in terms of strategic partners 30, 40 years ago is actually a really interesting opportunity, because if we're doing our jobs right, we're here to call clients on their bullshit. We're here to call, clients and to tell truths and to help them uncover stories that people are going to care about, because we know that the tenure of a CMO is shorter than it's ever been. We know that the tolerance that companies have for loss is as little as it's ever been. And the opportunity for us to be more respected and valued, to your point, Lizzy, at that consultant level with an eye for creative, I think is a really, really big thing for us. I'm super excited about it. But anyway, guys, this has been an awesome conversation. Really appreciate you guys lending your time and your thoughts, and hopefully everybody got a little something out of this in terms of the people behind the curtains and the crazy magic that we make. But thank y'all. This has been great.
Thank you.
Awesome.
Remember, it's like we should have some fun.
Yeah.
And Rice Krispies.
Yes. Yeah. And bring it. And Mama Kruggel, please cook it up Rice Krispies next time.
For the whole class, please. Thanks so
guys.
much. Appreciate
All right.
it.
Giant Stories is a production of Medium Giant and our parent company, the Dallas News Corporation. Interested in learning more about how your brand's story can be better told and sold? Visit mediumgiant.co or send an email to hello@mediumgiant.co.